Imagine a familiar scenario. The executive team decides the company must be agile, sending a top-down mandate for everyone to adopt new practices. There is a glaring contradiction in this approach. Agility relies on self-organization, yet leadership is attempting to force people to self-organize on command. Consider the target workforce. Software engineers and developers are highly intelligent and often introverted, and they rarely react well to having new operational rules dropped on their desks without input. When confronted with forced changes, these workers typically respond in one of two ways. They either quietly ignore the directives, engaging in a kind of internal sabotage, or they simply pack up and find a new employer. You cannot mandate psychological engagement. By relying on strict directives, leadership actively dismantles the collaborative culture they are attempting to build. An alternative approach comes from Daniel Mezick's framework, open space agility. The core premise requires a total shift in thinking. Agile adoption must be an invite-only process. Instead of pushing a change management structure onto the workforce, this method creates an environment where employees willingly pull the change toward themselves. In this system, executives do not surrender their authority. Instead of dictating daily tasks, they shift their focus to drawing clear behavioral boundaries. The leaders take responsibility for explaining the business challenges, the why, and then explicitly invite the workforce to determine the how. By setting these specific guardrails, like the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto, leadership eliminates the ambiguity that usually leads to anxiety. With the boundaries clearly marked, employees know exactly where they are free to innovate without the fear of overstepping. The launch mechanism for this framework is a meeting format developed by Harrison Owen called Open Space Technology. The mechanics of this kickoff are highly unusual. It is a massive, all-hands meeting that begins with a completely blank agenda. The attendees build the entire schedule on the spot, focusing only on the topics they care about. This validates a basic observation. The people who care enough to respond to the invitation are the ones most capable of driving the transition. This kickoff meeting triggers what is known as the neutral zone, a defined, protected period lasting roughly 90 to 100 days. During this window, teams actively experiment with new practices. They keep whatever improves their workflow and discard what fails, all without any penalty for making mistakes. This trial period effectively introduces game mechanics into corporate work. It gives employees a measurable sense of control, visible progress, and a distinct feeling of belonging to a team. The phase concludes with a second bookend open space meeting. Everyone gathers to inspect the results of their experiments and formalize the successful practices into new cultural rules. This defined chronological structure serves as a safe container. It takes the typical anxiety of a massive corporate transition and channels it into a manageable, time-boxed experiment. When executives attempt to force transitions from the top down, the failure rate is notoriously high. The opt-in approach, however, yields highly measurable business outcomes. This chart demonstrates the financial impact of the open space method. We see a 50% drop in implementation and coaching costs, occurring directly alongside a rising trend line in productivity output. Those deep financial savings directly correlate to the massive spikes in employee engagement scores generated by the opt-in method. Achieving true agility requires these high levels of engagement. It is the necessary energy that makes the entire transformation sustainable. Open space agility succeeds because it aligns perfectly with human nature. It replaces rigid corporate hierarchies with self-organizing communities. When you remove the threat of coercion from the system, information and culture naturally flow outward through these peer-to-peer networks. Lasting organizational change happens as a voluntary cultural shift, relying on the willingness of the people who actually do the work. Enterprise agility is essentially a game, and for any game to be successful, the players must willingly choose to step into the circle and play.